Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet lecture. As you all know, today's topic is world economy and India, and we will discuss in global crisis and impact on Indian economy. And for discussion on this topic, we have in our studio Dr. S.C. Sharma, who is actively involved in research in economics. So I hand over the studio to him, and he will proceed the lecture. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you. See, understanding the health of Indian economy in the context of world economy as of today is slightly difficult and complex phenomenon. The reason being that today we have a phase of economics where the globalization has taken over the world. So today, if we want to look at the Indian economy, we cannot look at Indian economy unless we look at what is happening in the world around, because economies are fully integrated with each and everything. Now this integrative process has functioned in such a manner that if you look into the first decade of the 21st century, then the largest economy of the world, that is United States of America, entered into a financial crisis, and that financial crisis evolved into an economic crisis which was not limited only to the US economy, but it transferred to Europe and other countries of the world. So the phenomenon is very complex, and if you really want to know the complexity, then I'll give you a story which emanates from a professor who was asked by the Journal of Economic Literature. He was a professor at the Sloan School of Management, and he was asked by the Journal of Economic Literature to give them or to write few to write review of 3 to 4 some important books on economic crisis which were available at that point of time. So the professor, before taking up that review, he thought that the number of books in the market are so many in number that concentrating for review only on 3 to 4 books will not be justifiable. And if I look into if I review more than these 3-4 books, it is possible that the area of disagreement would enlarge. And this is what precisely happened. When he started writing that review, he discovered that there are minor issues on which there is no agreement. The minor issue was whether the crisis started in 2006, when the housing market in USA was at peaking. Was it in the year 2007? The year 2007 was when the money market, that the credit market, was peaking, or whether it happened in 2008 when the Lehman Brothers ultimately collapsed. So you look at the differences among people, that they are not in a position to pinpoint when the economic crisis in USA or the financial crisis in USA started. When he moved further, then not only the timing, he also discovered that there was a great difference in the causes of these crises also. Now, the differences were whether it started with that Fannie Mac and Freddie Mac, that housing sort of financing corporation with that, or did it started with the global capital transfers, or whether it was the laxness on the part of the United States regulatory bodies, so on and so forth. Not only the timing, not only the causes, but even he discovered that people were not in agreement on certain hard facts also. The hard facts, he cited one example. The example was that in 2004, the Exchange Commission, the Security and Exchange Commission of United States of America, they laid down, they brought some change in the rule, and the changing rule was where the borrowing was the borrowing rules were slackened. So when he discovered that there are as many books and as many disagreements, then he thought of concluding that it is very difficult to, and if someone is trying to look at some definitive answer to this problem, then he said that this review is not in a position to provide any definitive answer. So you have the kind of situations which he discovered. Now these are supported by, if you look into recently a retired Secretary of the Government of India who started looking into the question of what is happening in the year 2011. Even in 2011, he discovers, he uses the events which were occurring in the United States of America as well as in Europe during the year to conclude that what people thought at the beginning of the year 2011, they discovered that the situation was entirely different when they entered the move towards the end of the year. And to prove his point, he cited 3 examples. At the beginning of the year, he cited the example from the chairman of the Federal Reserve of America. He also cited a statement from the IMF. He also stated the evidence which was or the statement which came from the International Financial Institution. Now, what was that? It was that in the beginning, all the 3, although it was a cautious statement, but all the 3, they were wanting or they were predicting that the crisis period is over and we are on the recovery path. But when we moved towards the end of the year, what we discovered? We discovered that the Federal Reserve Chairman is telling us that the recovery is fragile. Even the President of the America is also stating that the recovery is fragile. Now, what does it mean? And also, if you move over to the European Union or to the Europe, you will find that what is happening in Europe today. Even yesterday, there was a newspaper item which said that 9 countries out of the 17 in the Eurozone, 9 countries out of the 17 in the Eurozone, they have been declared or downgraded by S&P a rating by the rating agency, which means that wherever in the early phase we were hopeful that we are on the recovery path, by the end of the year we are discovering that that is no longer the case. Now, you see, with this story, you may get somewhat confused that why I am trying to give you this story. This story I have only given you as a preface to make you understand that in order to understand what is happening in the world economy today is not as that easy, or it is not that you take up a textbook and you would understand this. The complexities are very many, and therefore why I am trying to give you this preface is that today there are two sort of opinions which are emerging onto the scene. The first opinion which is emerging onto the scene is people are wondering whether we are going back to the 1920s worldwide depression. Is this the type of situation which is emerging in the world? This is one type of opinion. The other opinion which is also gaining ground and gaining ground very powerfully is that whether globalization, which has created inequalities, which has created unemployment, which has created injustice, or which has created instability in the not only in the world economy as a whole, is it a worthwhile proposition to carry on with this? So my whole point in discussing this is that if we have to understand world economy, then we have to understand world economy in the context of what happened in the American economy in the year 2008 when financial crisis started, and that financial crisis transmitted from there to Europe and from Europe to other countries, leading to a situation where it led to a situation where the world demand which is necessary for world growth that came to a naught, or that came to that declined very sharply. So therefore what I will do for today, I will try to make you understand so that you are in a position to understand the current crisis by giving you elementary understanding of what these crisis means, A, and what is the situation with the recessions. That is, I would like to make you understand something about the business cycles. Now, I am taking this for granted that you have done some courses in macroeconomics which have made you familiar with the concept of the business cycle. The concept of business cycle, the business cycle is only it is the economy-wide fluctuations. These fluctuations, they create two type of situations. One situation is the downturn, the other situation is the expansion type. So the economists, they divide cycles into two main phases, that is recession and expansion. You also are familiar, the recession is a recurring period of decline in output, income and employment, usually lasting from 6 months to 1 year. That is how the economists look at recession, affecting many sectors of the economy. And the difference between recession and depression is that whereas recession can take place in some sectors of the economy, in the case of depression, it is affecting the entire economy, and both the scale and duration is different from the recessions. Now these recessions, the economists, they have tried to explain through business cycle theories. Now these business cycle theories are again of two types. One is which is originating exogenously, the other which originates from within the system. Now what kind of recessionary situation we are experiencing today? It is generally largely the recession which has originated in the internal it is the internal factors or internal forces which have been responsible for bringing about this situation. Now besides these internal factors could be the speculative theory. There are speculative theories which say that the boom and bust are also associated with speculative activities, and there are people who take that there are demand induced cycles also. Now with this understanding about the nature of the business cycles, please remember that business cycle has two, it keeps on fluctuating. This fluctuation is downward and the fluctuation is on the upward, and in this case it is the market forces of demand and supply which keep on regulating the economic activity. If you look into the history of American economy, right from the worldwide depression time, then you will find that when this depression of 1929 took place, it created havoc, and this havoc was giving rise to a situation, and people were wondering whether it is an end of capitalism or it will lead to end of democracy also. These were the two type of thoughts which were emerging on the scene. The crisis was of the grave nature. But then as soon as the economy or the world economy overcame this situation, then came a period of very, very sustained economic growth in the entire industrial world. That is, this depression, from the depression when the economies came over, then the economies, the world's industrial economies, they enter into a phase of sustained economic growth. And this sustained economic growth period that continued till the 1960s. In between, if at all there were some recessions, these recessions were very mild and very of a short duration, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, which never came onto the surface or which never engulfed the world as it has engulfed today from 2008 onward. And by the late 1960s, people had started thinking whether the days of recession or days of fluctuations have really come to an end. That was the economists, they were holding conferences around this issue, whether we really the period of recessions is over. But then what suddenly happened? In the 70s, what happened in the 70s? There was an oil crisis of 73 and 79. This led to a recessionary situation in America. and the whole of 1970s was a period of stagflation. That is, inflation was combined with the economic slump. That was the situation in the 70s. But by the 90s again, we discovered that the situation had again improved in such a manner that the situation of recessions was not on the horizon or not on the analysis of economists. And you see, all through the logic which was being advanced was that in a situation that the markets usually manage the market supply and demand. It is only in case of a severe economic slump where supply seems to be everywhere and demand nowhere. This type of situation can be corrected by using fiscal policy or monetary policy or by increasing spending. And this is precisely what happened in 1987 when the US stock market crashed. Its crash was such that the Federal Reserve pumped cash into the system and the real economy did not even slow down, and the Dow soon recovered and the US entered into another phase of sustained expansion, which continued for nearly 10 years, the whole of 90s. It was only towards the last phase of 90s, last period of 90s, when the dot-com bubble started building up in the American economy, which was bubble means dot-com bubble means that the stock prices of the technology sector, they were going from upward, and in the process creating economic growth in the American economy. Now, this was the situation as far as the fluctuations in the US economies are concerned. Now, why I am giving you this history? I am giving you this history to make you understand and comfortable also to understand the other side of the stories, or the other lectures. They will help you, because you would have a background that any market economy would be saddled with the problem of business cycles. That is, it would continue to have recessions and expansionary phase. The recessions could be of a small duration, they could be of a bigger duration. If they are of a smaller duration, they can be corrected quickly, but if they are of a larger duration, the correction takes time. And also the policy responses will differ from crisis to crisis. Now, this you would be required to keep in mind in order to understand further what happens to the world economy from 2008 onward. But simultaneously, I would now, this is what was happening to the market economy, because the American economy was based on the market forces. That was not the case with the rest of the world from the immediately after the Second World War, the whole entire world was divided into three distinct parts. One was which was based on market economies, another which was based on communism, the other was which was based on what we call mixed economies. So immediately after the Second World War, the world economy was divided into three different parts. One which was based on, or which was trying to solve its fundamental economic problems through market economy, the other through communism, the third through the mixed economic system. Okay, so it is the market economies which were suffering from the economic fluctuations, and they were available in abundance in the United States of America. But now see, simultaneously what was happening in the world. What was happening in the world simultaneously was a process of globalization was unleashed. This process of globalization was unleashed initially through exporting technology and capital from high wage countries, that is from the developed world, to the low wage countries, that is towards the low wage countries, that is the developing countries. This is a process which started way back in the 60s. Now this process continued this system continued, and this process continued, and it was, this transfer was followed by preferential trading arrangements. Preferential trading arrangement, they were brought into the arena, which was helping the exports had started from the developing countries, and you would also recall that this is a phase which is also categorized as export-led growth. There were countries which were largely depending on exports. Now, and this was accomplished through the multinational corporations. Multinational corporations which were trying to set up their production in the low wage economies, reaping the benefit of low wage, and then producing it there and then exporting. This is how the multinationals came into the picture. Slowly and slowly, I'll put it this way, particularly when the USSR got disintegrated, the forces of liberalization, the forces of privatization, the forces which were giving fillip to the world, to the integrative processes, to the global capitalism, they were unleashed, they were underway, they were passing through. And you discover that as soon as the USSR was got disintegrated, the forces of globalization started functioning, coming onto the surface more vehemently. We, in our country, you can recall here that it was 1991 that the balance of payment crisis forced us to liberalize and then privatize. That is, the economic reform we enacted in 1991, we are still grappling with that issue. The reform period is going on. That is, two things happened in the world. One was what I told you, that the market economies The other was these market economies, in order to sustain themselves, because sustenance depends upon the world growth, the world production, and production comes from consumption. Production comes from consumption. From where to consume? Now, consumption means that unless we can create a situation, so this is the process, a process which was unleashed, what we call today the process of globalization. Now, this was unleashed. Now, if particularly you look at the period of 90s was very crucial for the world as a whole. Now, why I say that this was crucial for the world as a whole, I say because now this is precisely the period beginning the technological breakthroughs in information technology. Information technology made the world what we call a flat world. The world transformed itself into a flat. So this information technology made everything easy, and of all the things it made globalization very easy. Now this is a period which gives us some indication of the crises which were developing in the American economy and which were developing or which developed in the other parts of the world also. If you go by the available evidence, then the available evidence tells us that between 1970 and 2007, now this is a period, please understand, this is a period when America moved over to the free floating exchange rate. The countries of the world also, they didn't have any other option. Some adopted some form, some adopted some form, some adopted some form. The gold standard was, the days of gold standard were over. So this is a period, a very crucial period for the world economy if you start looking from 1970 onwards, both for the American as well as for the world economy. And between 1970 and 2007, world experienced as many as 124 crises. 124 crises between 1970 to 2007. Look at the gravity. And among these 124, the most important, which I would like to share with you, they are A, economic crisis arising out of the oil crisis of the 73. Oil crisis which was created by OPEC, oil producing companies, the countries. It's very important. They created a situation in the world where the oil prices, because oil gives energy to the economies, and if you create problem at the energy stage, then you will run into problems. So the most important crisis I am talking about, one which rose in 1970 because of 73 and 79 oil crisis, and then we had in the 80s a very serious crisis which is known as US saving and loan crisis of the 80s. US saving and loan crisis. Then there was a crisis which is prolonged Japanese crisis of the 1990s. That crisis continued for almost 10 years. And then we had a crisis, Asian crisis in 1997. And then we had crises in the Latin American countries, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil. The Asian crisis, if you can recall your memories, if you cannot recall your memories, then please try to keep in mind that something happened in the East Asian countries. East Asian countries which were growing at a very high phase, and their growth was based on, it is a case of export-led growth case countries. The Asian crisis of 1997, which ultimately led to a currency crisis also, this was a crisis which started in Thailand. And from Thailand, it spread to other countries in East Asia, and from East Asia to Latin America, and from Latin America to Russia. Look at the contagion. The Asian crisis starting in Thailand, then spreading to the other East Asian countries, from the other East Asian countries, then going to Latin America, and then finally to Russia. Now think of, this is the situation which we will face, or which the world face, if we move towards what we call global capitalism, integrated global capitalism, or what we call globalization. Now, after this, if you look into the two other crises, the one crisis which put the American economy in 2001 in recession. Now, this recession in 2001 of the US economy was because of the technical stocks bubble, what is popularly now known as dot-com bubble. This bubble burst, and as soon as this bubble burst means stock prices came down, as is happening in our country, that after having reached 21,000, the 30 share index at the BSE, it has now come down to almost 15,000 or maybe slightly more. Now, as soon as this is coming down, how it is affecting the economy? The growth rate is also coming down. And what happened in USA in 2001, again we had a recession. Now, as soon as this recession got over, this recession unfortunately or fortunately got over, not very quickly, but not very late either. By 2004, the American economy had started again strengthening itself. The growth was picking up, and this period of 2004, 5, 6, 7 is a period where growth was very high in the, is not very, it was quite high in the American economy. And this was a period when housing bubble was building up. This was a period when housing bubble was also building up, which ultimately got into or which ultimately burst in 2008, and the effect of that we are even today suffering. Now, the story which I have given you of the East Asian crisis of the 1997, transmitting to the starting from Thailand, then moving over to the East Asian countries, and then to the Latin American countries, and then ultimately ending up in Rus. This story, or which is a fact, I have given you to highlight one more fact. That is, it is not always that the full consequences of an economic crisis is available immediately. It takes time before the crisis really takes shape or comes onto the scene. And the classic example I'll give you, that in case of Argentina, a crisis began in 1995 as part of the fallout from Mexico's own crisis and was exacerbated by the East Asian crisis of 1997. 95 Argentina crisis started, then it was given some fillip by the Mexican own crisis, and then aggravated by the, so it takes time. When it finally reached Brazil, it was the year 1998. So 95 start, then 97 East Asian crisis, and then ultimately 98 Brazilian crisis, which means that this particular crisis, 98, ultimately it was in 2001 when the full impact was seen. So whenever we have this kind of situation, this situation, as I told you right in the beginning, that these recessions can take, its periodization could be from 2 to 10 years. Sometimes they are mild, sometimes they are very short, sometimes they are very severe also. Now this we have to keep in mind. Only then we will be in a position to understand what happened in America, in the case of American crisis, what happened, that we will be in a position to understand only then. क्या करना, खत्म करना?
You can continue.
नहीं, बस 2 मिनट में, मतलब इसको मैं क्लोज कर लूँगा.
We have 10 minutes.
अभी और 10 मिनट्स बोल सकता हूँ?
हाँ हाँ बोल सकते हैं.
बोल सकता हूँ ना. उसके बाद जो है फिर डिस्कशन शुरू होगा. या
No, we will continue with some other lecture like tomorrow.
no, but give me 2 minutes so that I close.
Okay.
So with this understanding that today we are a globalized world. Being globalized world, we are prone to this type of crisis. A crisis in which we are today. The history of these crises, I have given you that the entire the period of the 20th century, beginning 1920s and going up to the first decade of the 21st century, except for a very profound stable period up to 1960, from this period onward, we have entered into a period of economic fluctuation. These fluctuations are of mild nature, these fluctuations are sometimes short, sometimes long. This is the entire episode which I have brought it before you. only to apprise you that if you really want to, you will not be otherwise in a position to understand what happened during the period of global financial crisis. Because there I have to deal with what was the situation before this crisis came up onto the scene. I'll give you only why I want to take up in this manner, because I have to take up what was the backdrop to this crisis, and from this backdrop I'll try to give you the genesis and how this crisis developed, and how this crisis after developing transmitted to Europe, and what happened to the other countries. This I'll take up tomorrow, but you have to be well conversant with the situation which I have discussed today. Now, I'll again repeat that you must be conversant with the concept of business cycles. That if it is a market economy, and if market economy is unregulated, then please take it that market economies all by themselves do not have a self-correcting mechanism. Here you can refresh your microeconomics, which was taught to you maybe few years back, where perfect competition, monopoly, imperfect competition, these issues were discussed. And also when the economics of unemployment was discussed with you, then someone must have told you that any market economy, if it is unregulated market economy, then market economy ultimately degenerates into inequalities, into unemployment, and into injustice. It is to correct these distortions, the market economy need to be regulated. Keep this in mind, because this is from here that I'll start tomorrow's discourse, when I'll give you some backdrop to the global crisis, and then followed by how this crisis developed, and then how it transmitted, and then we can think of to concluding what is the situation in the world economy, and then we will follow it how this crisis has impacted the Indian economy in a later lecture. Okay, thank you.
Sir, I want to ask you one question.
Please.
Sir, as we see recession going back towards like for 2 years back, the recession came in India. Was it actually happened because of US economy, or was it the impact of globalization?
It was an impact of globalization. You see, there are certain fundamentals. There are certain fundamentals. Production takes place if there is a consumption.
Yeah.
Otherwise, production for what? Unless there is a consumption, you don't go in for production. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, this fundamental fact you must keep in mind, which means that there has to be a demand. If you really want to consume something, there has to be demand.
Yeah.
No, demand, you cannot have demand unless you have money. You have to have money in order to spend. Now, there was a crisis in the US economy.
Yeah.
US economy was declining, incomes were declining, unemployment was going up.
Yeah.
And we were tied up to the American economy in some form or the other, although not a very heavily dependent on American economy,
Yeah.
but some of our exports were there also. Our textile, the garment industry, it got affected immediately.
Yeah.
So the impact which we had, that has something to do with the global crisis.
Okay. So, is there any danger of recession in nowadays as well?
See, if you could have listened to my initial discourse with which I started with,
Yeah.
I started with to make you understand. And this is, unfortunately, this happens because in economics you will find as many opinions as there are economists.
Yeah.
And it is very difficult to predict situations because
course.
in economics the situations is not controlled in a laboratory.
Yeah.
Economic situation is affected by exogenous factors which are external to the system. Now, who knows if there is a war tomorrow, what will happen?
Yeah.
So your rhythm will go off.
Yeah, of course.
What happens if there is a technological breakthrough? कुछ चीज़ मिल गई आपको, टेक्नोलॉजी मिल गई, तो उससे आपको बहुत कुछ मिल जाएगा. So the answer to your question, if there is any danger of recession,
Yeah.
there is a danger of recession if anyone has looked into what is happening in Europe. It is possible that while the 1930s depression was initiated in the American economy, this recession or depression its epicenter may be in Europe. Because Europe as of day is in a bad shape.
Okay.
Europe as of day is in a bad shape. And if anything happens and Europe collapses, what will happen to because even if we are in India are in a position to maintain a rate of growth of 5% or 6%, now a rate of growth of 5 to 6% coming down from 9.5% to, so it means a lot.
Yeah.
And if the depression continues in there, we have one possible solution to, I think, the government of India or the technocrats in India. They are they are probably working hard. You see, there is a danger. The danger is that the demand for Asian exports would decline in Europe. It would decline in America also if America does not pick up.
Yeah.
Then what happens? If we have to sustain this level of growth, then we have to find some customers for our products.
Yeah.
Now, who are the customers? We have to find customers among the Asian countries.
Yeah.
It is the Asian countries which might give us some sustainability, and if that is not available to us, take it from me that we are also day by day heading towards the Hindu rate of growth.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So, on this note, I would like to conclude the lecture, and we will continue this lecture tomorrow with the same resource person, Dr. S.C. Sharma, and you can ask your queries on the same time. So, thanks for being here, and thank you, sir, for coming here.
Thank you very much for calling me, inviting me, and giving me an opportunity to talk.
Thank you, sir.